On August 31st, at a different feature in the South China Sea, Sabina Shoal, the flagship of the Philippine Coast Guard, known as the Teresa Magbuana, was rammed by a Chinese Coast Guard vessel. No one was injured in this incident, but there is about a 1.5-meter hole in the hull of the Teresa Magbuana. These skirmishes are part of a worrying new pattern of escalation and confrontation emerging in the struggle in the South China Sea.
Aaron, we've been talking and I guess worrying about the South China Sea for years. These sound like really dangerous incidents. Is there a possibility that they could immediately inflame into something bigger?
Well, for the moment at least, it seems as though around Second Thomas Shoal, where Sierra Madre is, there's been an agreement put in place, a bilateral agreement that was reached between the Philippines and China, where after that June 17th incident, they really stepped back from the brink and decided to negotiate what they call a provisional understanding to allow Sierra Madre to be resupplied. China says it will inspect the vessels, but it seems to be doing this from a distance of several hundred meters. And so there's a real kind of diplomatic accomplishment of the Philippines that they were able to reach this agreement. And so the immediate risk of a flashpoint that could escalate into something bigger seems to have passed, but the longer-term risk that there will continue to be skirmishes like these, that remains.
So can you just put this into a bit of context then for us? Just talk about what kind of territory we're really dealing with here.
Yeah, sure. So I think we often talk about the South China Sea dispute, and it's really three sets of disputes. So you have the Paracel Islands in the northwest of the sea, around 130 islands between the coasts of Vietnam and China. And those have been occupied by China since 1975. They have an airport there that has hosted fighter jets, and it really controls that area. And so it's not the kind of flashpoint that the rest of the sea is. Then you have Scarborough Shoal, which is a much larger feature series of coral reefs that are only about 150 nautical miles from Manila Bay. And that proximity to the capital of the Philippines really makes Scarborough Shoal the sea's most strategic feature. But China's controlled that feature since 2012, since the Philippines retreated from it. And then you have the Spratly Islands in the southeast of the sea, and this is the largest group of islands in the South China Sea. And that's really where a lot of the tension that we've seen in recent years has been. It's also where China built 7 large military bases from 2013 to 2016 by reclaiming land on top of coral reefs. But it's also now where the greatest pushback is coming, particularly from Vietnam and the Philippines.
And why has China been pushing into this territory? Why have they been building these bases?
One theory is that China is an expansionist power, that Xi Jinping has made the reacquisition of Chinese territories that have been lost in earlier eras a key part of his rule. But I think a more likely reason that we've seen them pressing, particularly around Second Thomas Shoal, where the June 17th incident took place, and now around Sabina Shoal, is that they're looking for a gap between what the Philippines expects of its senior ally, the United States, and what that ally is willing to provide, particularly when it comes to what are really just rocks and reefs that are uninhabited in the middle of the South China Sea.
And the ramifications of these tensions go far beyond the South China Sea, right? How are the US and its allies responding, or how might they respond?
So I think a lot of people, when they hear about this, they fear that this could escalate into some sort of US-China conflict, and that this is where potentially World War III will begin, not Taiwan, but the South China Sea. I think that's unlikely. It's clear that neither China nor the United States wants to go to war over some reefs and rocks. What's a much greater risk is that the United States' treaty commitments, security guarantees to the Philippines will come under question, that the Philippines will look to the United States to respond if, say, a Philippine sailor loses his life. That June 17th incident could have been much worse, and that the United States will decide that it doesn't want to respond in a military way, and that then the Philippines will begin to question whether the alliance really gives it the benefits that it expects, and other U.S. treaty allies in the Indo-Pacific and elsewhere might begin to ask the same questions of the United States. The Philippines is not the only country that expects the United States to defend outlying islands. Japan has a very similar situation in the Senkaku Islands. And if those security guarantees begin to lose their credibility, that'll create a lot more instability in the Indo-Pacific, even for countries that don't rely on those guarantees.
So what's the answer then? If you've got a situation where the US doesn't want to be pushed to the point where it has to actually help one of its allies, but those countries need to respond in some way?
So one answer is really close coordination between the Philippines and the United States in terms of where their vessels are going, what they're doing, and then also what the expectations are that the Philippines has of the United States so that it doesn't take on risk that is beyond what America is willing to step in to back them up on. And then second is something that the Philippines has pioneered and which should continue, which is this transparency initiative, they call it, sharing in real time what China is doing in the South China Sea, publicizing the details of these incidents in video and audio. For many years, countries in the South China Sea suffered in silence. These incidents would happen and we would find out about them weeks or months later. And now in real time, we get to see what's happening on the South China Sea because of the efforts of this transparency initiative. And that's led other countries that were previously silent on the South China Sea, particularly European countries and other Indo-Pacific countries like Japan and New Zealand, to speak out every time that China takes an action that raises risks in the South China Sea or that violates the Philippines' rights under the Arbitral Tribunal ruling in 2016, which awarded much of the South China Sea to the Philippines. So it's raised the diplomatic costs of these actions in the South China Sea.
In other areas, and I'm thinking here like Xinjiang or on Hong Kong, calling out China hasn't done very much. Is it really going to be effective in the South China Sea?
For many years, it was really just the United States that was backing up the Philippines on these questions. But now we're seeing European countries, which have real concerns that these statements might affect their relationship with China, step in and say, on this particular issue, they think that this is a concern. And for China, these rocks and reefs may not be as important as Hong Kong or Xinjiang. And so I don't know that they're going to be as determined to override those concerns as they would in those areas of core interest. Even though we've seen a de-escalation at Second Thomas Shoal and potentially at Sabina Shoal as well, there's a real risk that there will be another incident in the South China Sea that leads to the Philippines or other American treaty allies